Hello and welcome to another episode of the AAIM High Podcast, standing for Asian American Inspires in Management. Today we have a special guest, Shella Abe. As a co-founder and head of True's consumer practice, Shella joined the firm in 2016 to establish its beauty, fashion, and lifestyle sector, which has grown to lead the industry both domestically and internationally. In addition to co-leading the CEO and board practices, she remains deeply involved in True's global consumer expansion efforts. Her career spans over 20 years in executive search with experience at firms like Heidrick Struggles, where she specialized in digital media, entertainment, retail, and luxury. Her journey began as a consultant at Deloitte & Touche, tackling complex international tax and finance issues for multinational corporations. With her innovative perspective and expertise working with organizations from pre-revenue startups to Fortune 100 giants, Shella has a standard for excellence. Thank you, Shella, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Ben. Appreciate it that you thought of me, and I'm flattered to be here.
So to start off, let's talk about childhood and upbringing. Because this podcast is centered around being an Asian American leader in business, it is important to first understand each guest's childhood and upbringing as an Asian American, because ideas instilled within you from your parents and environment may have helped lead to your success and where you are today. So first, could you maybe just explain your childhood situation growing up? Where did you live? Did you have any siblings? What were some of your family dynamics like?
Yeah, sure. And now that I think about it, I feel like there is a lot to tell that would be valuable to share in terms of shaping who I am today. So I was born in Manhattan in New York. We lived in Queens for a little bit. My parents had a lot, typical immigrant family story. They had a lot of businesses ranging from women's fashion retail stores. They sold imported beauty products from Asia. They had a bakery. They had a sneaker store. I mean, you name it. And so when I was in fifth grade, my parents moved to Orange County, California. And it was because my father's brother had a sneaker store in Compton. I say that because it was crazy. It was during the time of the Rodney King beatings and the LA riots, and I was in fifth grade. But he had a couple of sneaker stores, so he wanted my family my dad to take over one. And so we went there, and right as we got there, like a month later, the riots happened, and it was just like a really frightening experience. But while they were there, they had a couple of different businesses, and then we came back to New York. And then fast forward, I went to school in Chicago. And during school, I got in my first year. My parents had a bakery in Queens during that time. And they needed manpower. It wasn't doing that well. And so I don't know what I was thinking, but at the time, just because I have two younger brothers and I'm the eldest, I always felt like sort of the caretaker. And at that time, I thought, you know what, I'm going to take off. In my first year, I went the first quarter because we're on the quarter system at U of C. I'm going to take off the last 3 quarters actually to help work at the bakery. And so I did that, and I came back and I was able to thankfully graduate on time just by taking courses in the summer. And then after I graduated at U of C, I, at that point, didn't know what I wanted to do. And I had a lot of friends majoring in economics and policy, political science. I was a public policy major. And ultimately, I ended up at Deloitte & Touche. I had a summer internship, and then I went there full time. But at the time, also, my parents had moved to Florida, and my brothers, I have two younger brothers. One is 4 years younger, one is 8 years younger. So they would have been high school and middle school. When they moved to Florida, there wasn't as much of a Korean community there. And so my parents, somehow we agreed upon when I graduated and I was 21 that they would come and live with me, and that I would take care of them so that they could go to school in Chicago and be surrounded by, there was a community of like Korean friends and, church. And so, they came and did that. And so I think I say all that because, growing up, there were a lot of instances where we had to be independent, and we had to rely on our own instincts. And, it was grounded obviously in the values that our parents had taught us. But I think that sort of shaped me for who I am today.
You mentioned that like Korean community. How did that impact you?
Yeah, I think wherever I went, there was a large Asian community. And so naturally, I guess it was easy for us to assimilate. We moved around a lot. And I think that's why for my brothers who were in Florida, they were clearly the outliers. I think it was hard for them to quickly make friends and, feel like they were part of the community. And so as soon as they came to Chicago, I think they just felt like it was more like home to them. And it's interesting though, when you're surrounded by the Asian community, obviously you being Asian and being raised by immigrant Asian families, it's a lot of the similar values of working hard, being respectful, being thankful, just always having gratitude. The one thing though that was tricky for me, I think going into the workforce, was my parents instilled in me to always be deferential to your superiors, and not to make too much of a fuss, and to do as you've been told. And so when I got to Deloitte, it was interesting because I looked around me and a lot of my peers who were just college grads, had a very strong voice in terms of, no, I can't stay late for this project. I have an event to attend. Or, I'm not sure what you're asking of me. Does this make sense? Or X, Y, and Z. So for me, it was always like, yes, thank you. Whatever project you give me, whatever you need from me, thank you so much. But I realized though, at times, and especially, moving up the ranks as a female executive and a female leader, to have a seat at the table, you have to have a voice, and there is a way to be direct but kind about it. But that, took me years to learn.
Yeah. You mentioned some of like the events where you had to become more independent growing up. Are there any specific stories that you remember?
Yeah, I mean, I think just, at an early age, parents were always working, so we weren't home a lot. That they were a lot, so I, took care of my brothers, and although my mom was home for a certain period of time, but there was always caretaking. Like I always felt like their second mom. And then especially when I was 21 and I was, I had all my friends living in downtown Chicago or Lincoln Park or, just somewhere cool. And I was off in the suburbs, like 40 minutes, because they had really good public school systems. I moved there for my brothers and I had to commute in on the train to Deloitte. But I remember those days. I was 21. I was, my brothers, we'd all wake up. My brothers would drop me off at the train station. They would go to the school. I'd rush to the office. When I was done at 5, I'd call them, make sure like the rice is on the rice cooker and you're defrosting like the meat in the freezer. And I come home, make food. It was kind of like a single mom scenario at 21. And I just am so grateful to my brothers who, were able to grow up as independent and, go off and do great things and stay out of trouble. So that we grew up real fast in that environment.
Yeah. And Finally, how did your parents' experiences influence your like perspective on work and especially success?
It was just to be relentless and have tenacity.
Mm,
It's like, don't give up, keep
mm-hmm,
going. And I was raised in a very spiritual Christian family. So a big part of that was lean on God and have faith.
mm-hmm,
And that has just carried me through, the lowest and darkest of times.
mm,
But again, it was this burning desire. And I mean, going back to the word being tenacious and just keep going after it. Like I would see my parents, start businesses, they would fail, but they get right back up again and start something else and keep going. And so I guess that's just something that has stuck with me.
mm-hmm. Because of your parents starting businesses constantly when you were growing up, did that give you a want to start your own business or do something in that field?
Yeah, it's a great question. And like I said, like it was a mix of both. I wanted some stability. And so
Mm-hmm,
coming out of U of C, actually, went into it thinking, oh my God, I want to be a pediatrician. And then I quickly failed OChem. And so I thought, okay, this is not right for me.
mm-hmm,
And then I was like, I want to be a psychologist. And, it's kind of what I do today, is some of that, which is why I enjoy it so much. But there
mm-hmm,
was a part where I wanted some stability. So going into Deloitte, I was part of this corporation. I was getting, a steady monthly paycheck, which was really nice.
mm-hmm,
But at the same time, so I had joined Deloitte and had been at a couple of other corporations, including Heidrick. And then after, I wanted to be part of a startup and do something different. And so I did go to a startup right before I had joined True Search. And joining True was sort of like a mini startup. I mean, at the time, there were maybe, 50 plus people there.
mm-hmm,
And this would have been 8.5 years ago. There was really no consumer practice. There was, we were doing some consumer, but the majority was enterprise software. Uh, and so it was coming in and just, you know, no one in the firm really knowing um, my world initially of beauty and fashion and just kind of getting out there, pounding the pavement and, trying to bring in business while you're trying to, hire and build resources.
mm-hmm,
So yeah, I think it has inspired in me and especially my brothers to um, want to do something on our own or want to do a startup, but at the same time, always knowing that, you have a safety net. Because I never wanted to be in the situation where there was instability like I sort of had growing up.
mm. Yeah, and as we move on to more about your education and early career and transition, can you maybe explain your journey through college at U Chicago and how you got that first internship and job at Deloitte?
At Deloitte, yeah, actually, I'm very grateful to a friend who's like an older classman. He was at Deloitte for a very long time. And he had asked me what I had wanted to do. I honestly did not know at that point,
Mm-hmm,
what I wanted to do, and it was unsettling. I had so many ambitious friends around me who were on the track of banking, consulting, doctor, professor, lawyer. And at that point in time, I was lost.
mm-hmm,
Um, and so he had said, "Why don't you interview at Deloitte?"
mm-hmm,
This was in their international tax transfer pricing department. I interned there, and then I got the full-time job after I graduated. But it was nice because I mean, Deloitte is a great company. A lot of people who come up through either banking or consulting, typically it's a good foundation and they go on to do really interesting things.
mm-hmm,
And having Deloitte, although it was not a long, tenure,
mm-hmm,
it's been, a valuable point in my career. Even I think when I was at Heidrick, the office managing partner at that time was looking specifically for people who were ex-consultants to join.
mm-hmm.
So it's helped me along the way for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned how you kind of felt lost and not knowing what you wanted to do and being surrounded by ambitious people. So how did you eventually find what you wanted to do, and what you were really interested in?
So at Deloitte, I was I wasn't as inspired or as motivated. And not that I wasn't surrounded by brilliant people. I loved my colleagues there and bosses there, and they were incredibly talented. But for me, I felt like I wasn't utilizing my best assets. And even at that time, I didn't know what my best assets were until, another friend randomly was like, "Hey, Shella, I work at this executive search firm called Wood Kiefer. Have you ever heard of executive search?" And at that point, this is 2000. No one, I mean, I don't know. Now, True recruits people out of college. At that point, you didn't major or, you weren't inspired to then, go on and become a search professional, executive search professional. So I knew nothing about it. But she had explained to me in terms of what executive search is, and that, you're responsible for recruiting top tier leadership. And through that, with this, how much of an impact human capital has on a company. And so it was very eye-opening for me. And so I joined as an analyst, was promoted to associate. But that was an industry that, it was interesting, but it wasn't as exciting to learn and dig into as like fashion or beauty or, consumer. And so I was, Wood Kiefer specializes in healthcare and higher education. And so that's my entree into the world of executive search. But as I was doing it, I was like, wow, I love, because I'm a sponge and I'm just curious. And my mom would always tease me and joke that when I was young, I would ask 1,000 questions. I was probably that annoying child. Like every little thing would be in a car, like, why is that this, or what's that, or what? And so being constantly curious, this job satiated that. I would meet people, they would tell me about their lives, their careers, how they got to where they were. And I was constantly learning. And then on the other side, I was working alongside these, really successful clients who had a certain need. And so that matchmaking piece of it was really interesting to me. And I thought, wow, this is something that I am good at. And again, going back to, having that strong spiritual faith, it was like, wow, like I kind of went down all of these different paths to get me to here, right? At the end of the day, like God sort of guided me to this place, and this is the career for me. And so it just like naturally evolved. There was no meticulous planning to get to this place.
Yeah. And so from that, when you were first introduced to True Search, what did that transition look like? What was that opportunity?
Yeah, so I was called. So at that time, there was Todd, who was my co-head of consumer. Brad and Joe were the CEOs, and they had it was sort of a gamble. It was, hey, do you want to come in? And we're looking to diversify, and at that point in time, the focus was like tech businesses or tech enabled businesses. And so here I was coming in doing, work across retail and CPG. And it was sort of I guess in the beginning, we kind of went into it not knowing what could come of it, but knowing that Brad was building a culture where it was people that he wanted to work with, like good, hardworking people who are smart, who are innovative in their thinking. And that's why I appreciated True, because it was this antithesis of like, large corporate culture, but it was a place of meritocracy. So you didn't have to wait, 3 or 4 years before you got promoted. And so they just gave you a lot of rope, and we sort of took a bet on each other, and I guess here we are.
Yeah. And now to like talk about like your current job, what you're doing right now, just so everyone knows, could you maybe like summarize what you do in maybe like a quick 3 to 4 sentences?
Yeah. So as you had mentioned when you introduced me, I co-founded and co-lead our consumer practice. And basically, we specialize in identifying and recruiting top tier leadership talent for companies across various industries. I obviously focus on consumer, but we have, software, healthcare, financial services, industrial, and then functionally, across the gamut: CEO, board, supply chain, CMO, digital, CFO, you name it. But we basically, leverage our deep network and our industry knowledge, and we connect companies with exceptional talent, right? That aligns with their strategic goals and their culture. And so my focus has been really placing CEOs, presidents, and other senior leaders to drive growth. And sometimes those companies are, public companies. Sometimes they're PE-backed, founder-led. Sometimes they're a startup.
So what does like a typical work day or like work week look for you right now?
Oh my God. Everyone says, if you want to avoid vomiting, don't look at Shella's calendar. It is, we are so busy. So, a lot of my time is spent with clients, being in the market with candidates, and then a portion of it is internally on leadership, on hiring, mentoring, think strategic planning for the future. But on a day-to-day, it could be a mix of things. It could be a mix of, a couple of internal calls with the teams to discuss upcoming status calls we have with the client, what the pipeline looks like. It's a mix of there is an opportunity for us to work with a certain founder or company because they have a need, and so it's an introductory call. It's a catch-up call with old placements, and it's a call with your internal practice leads to discuss what we're doing across the board, and what are the things we can implement and put in place so that the culture here continues to be thriving, and our team continues to feel motivated. It's a variety of those things.
Yeah. So what is like your favorite part of your job? What do you enjoy most?
It's a great question, and thankfully there's a lot of it I love. So I love mentoring the teams, and especially the young group coming up, because I sometimes think, gosh, I'm so impressed. I'm like, when I was that age in my 20s or even in my 30s, like, what was I doing? I was nowhere near that smart. I don't know, that hardworking, that articulate, that confident. So that part I really enjoy. And then it's just meeting new executives, meeting new talent, and hearing their stories. And for a period of time, Ben, I was pulled away in terms of either being reactive and sorting out a certain situation, or more on the internal stuff. And when I'm back to interviewing, new CEOs or C-suite, and learning their stories and who they know, and when they were at a certain company, who they were mentored by, it's all really fascinating. And, especially like what was going on at that company during that time. And I also love, when I catch up with, let's say, a CEO that I placed a year ago and haven't talked to them, and hopefully I mean, best case scenario, they're saying, oh my God, I love it. You
Yeah.
know, the business has grown 2x and we're doing great things. Thank you so much for finding me this home. And knock on wood, thankfully, the majority of those calls are positive in that way.
Mm. Yeah. So then on the opposite side, what is something that you don't enjoy as much or dislike about your job?
Mm. There are so many highs and lows in search.
Mm.
So when I interview people, I say, you really need a thick skin
Mm-hmm.
to be able to operate in this industry and not drive yourself crazy. Because even after doing this for a little over 20 years, there are nights when I can't sleep
Mm-hmm.
for various reasons. And the nights where I can't sleep, it's less so the clients. Like early on, it's like, oh my gosh, like, is this client mad at me? I'm taking it personally. Is this candidate mad at me? Or, oh my God, is this candidate going to accept? I couldn't go to sleep. Or even that time, like, what is my boss, the partner that I was reporting into, going to think of me? Now,
Mm-hmm.
what keeps me up at night is just really making sure, like, my teams are inspired. Like, am I doing a good job as a leader? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and are my teams thriving? Do they feel inspired? Am I there enough for them? Is there enough work to support them and to keep everyone busy?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's keeping me up at night. But it's the highs and lows and just things outside of your control. I always say, like, our product speaks back to us, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
most fickle. Human beings are the most fickle, things out there, and so I cannot, I can't possibly control everything. And, sometimes it's always sort of it's the recruiter's fault or blame the recruiter. Which I can understand because things can get so emotional.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately we work with such great clients and great candidates that there is a mutual respect there, and
Mm-hmm.
an understanding. Uh, but yeah, it's the highs and lows and sort of the feast and famine. And it depends on the markets, right? Like, my gosh, some years there's just so much work coming in the door, like we don't even have enough resources or people to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And some it's scary, it dips because the markets are dipping. And so it's kind of being able to ride through those highs and lows and sort
Mm-hmm.
of stay even keeled through it all.
Yeah. And how do you stay like even and not letting those lows especially affect you and your work?
Good red wine. Um, it is so important
Mm-hmm.
to learn how to de-stress.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it is like saying, okay, like at this time, I'm gonna put my phone away at least for a couple of hours and like just go for a walk and
Mm-hmm.
just be by myself in my own thoughts. Like for me, that's really important because we have on a day to day, I speak with so many different people. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm serving as not just me, but like, recruiters tend to, and this is what I love about my job is like you tend to be the therapist to the
Mm-hmm.
person. You tend to be their confidant, their everything. And I love absorbing that. I love helping and I love being able to guide and coach. And I never take that role and position for granted. But at the same time, you forget that there's so much you're taking on. And so that you should just make sure you have time just for yourself. And for me, I need to be alone in my thoughts just to process. And so that then is able or allows me to recharge for the next day.
And you talked about mentoring and you mentoring groups in the young generation. During your career, did you have a mentor and like what lessons did they either teach you that you then gave to your mentees?
So at Wake Kiefer, there was there was an elder partner there that had really, I didn't interact with her a lot, but she was very direct and she sort of gave me nuggets here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I took that, and it was kind of those nuggets that I didn't get from my parents growing up because they were so busy working. And this was more about, be confident, be confident behind your thoughts or your decision. And I really appreciated that. Now, after that point in time, it's weird, Ben. Like I wish I could say there's this one mentor that I can point to who was amazing.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I had worked with some erratic people where I learned what not to do. And I learned, there were especially some female partners where I thought, gosh, that is not somebody that I emulate. That is not who I want to be. And it was really trying to discipline myself to not be that person. And I guess be as normal as I could, because some recruiters are crazy. Actually, that was the one biggest compliment someone paid to me was, Shella, you are the most normal recruiter I've met. And I'm like, well, at first I didn't know how to take that. And then I thought about it. I was like, thank you so much.
Yeah. So what has been your favorite search or like the best search that you've worked on and why?
Oh my gosh. There's so many. I mean, we've worked with some incredible brands. Like you walk through the aisles of Sephora where your sister might appreciate this or your mom, but it's like, your Drunk Elephant, your Sol de Janeiro, your, Summer Fridays, all of these Milk Makeup, all these brands that have gone to do amazing things, including a massive exit. We built most of their entire C-suite, starting with the CEO. Interesting searches are whenever it's celebrity backed.
Who are some of the celebrity backed companies that you've done searches for?
So celebrities we work with Jennifer Lopez, Lady Gaga, Hailey Bieber on Road, Gwen Stefani, Serena Williams. But it's not like a lot of them were involved in the search process. Actually, though, Jennifer Lopez was involved and she would attend every update call, which to me was absolutely astonishing because she's probably the busiest woman in the world. But this was important to her because it was her CEO. And she would join every call with her then partner, Alex Rodriguez. I think the hardest part of that search was not calling him A-Rod and not calling her J-Lo.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other stories there that I won't share now, but it was quite the search, and there were a lot of learnings on my end as well. And so we did the CEO search, and then after we placed the CEO, we placed the CMO, the head of digital, and a couple of others.
Yeah. So as a recruiter, what are some things that you look for and when you want to place in a high role, especially like CEO or like CMO?
Well, you're always looking at, obviously, on the resume, right? What you want to look at their upbringing, right? So you start with, obviously it's great for someone to have educational pedigree, and then they went on to maybe go to a early days a consulting firm or banking, and then they went to a blue chip company, whether it's a L'Oreal or a P&G or a Pepsi, and you cut your teeth in marketing. And typically those companies have really great training programs. And so you can tell by a person's resume if they were really high potential because they were consistently tapped on the shoulder every 2 years or every year and a half to then move into a different area. And then, hopefully there's tenure there. And so they might have did that for, more than 3-4 years. And then they went somewhere else. And then maybe they went to an earlier stage company where they really had to be hands-on and roll up the sleeves and being able to effectively navigate an environment that didn't have a lot of resources. But what's interesting is because I've been doing this for like 20 years, early on, when you look at people's resume, it was like, 5 years, 7 years, 6
Mm-hmm.
years. Now it's like 2, 3, 4. I mean, they're a lot jumpier,
Mm-hmm.
but we always dig in as to the why. Because
Mm-hmm.
truly, if you're only at a place for 2 years, that's not long enough for you to have made some sort of impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are looking for somebody that has, longevity, right, in each of those companies. And then it's always a great testament to them if their former boss brought them over
Mm-hmm.
to their next place. And along the way, we also, because we have, such a deep network, we do a lot of, referencing, back channel
Mm-hmm.
referencing.
Yeah.
Um, and, with these CEOs, CMOs, or executives that we present to the clients, we want that, supplemental information. And so it's always great to hear when they are, highly praised by people that they've worked with. So
Mm-hmm.
so those are some of the things that we're looking at. It is a red flag when, they haven't been anywhere for more than, let's say, 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next part, we talk about challenges and overcoming obstacles. Being an Asian American in a leadership role comes with its own sets of challenges. So if you have faced any, what were those obstacles and how did you overcome them?
Mm, I think it's interesting. I don't think that has ever really held me back. The only thing that has held me back is my own insecurities and
Mm-hmm.
my own, sort of learnings and how I grew up of always respecting your elders and being deferential to your superiors and not being too vocal and making a fuss. And
Mm-hmm.
as those things were ingrained in me from such an early age, I had to reprogram myself in
Mm-hmm.
corporate America. And that took a long time. And so when I'd have my boss or I'd have other more senior people around me, you know, say something, I was always a yes person.
Mm-hmm.
Until, obviously years ago, I was able to find my voice. So that was the only thing. I think less Asian American, it is interesting. Like True has been, I mean, when I worked at Woodkeefer, there were a lot of white male partners, and I think I
Mm-hmm.
was probably the only Asian American person there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, did I feel it? I mean, not really. It was a really friendly Midwest culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming to True, there wasn't as much diversity in the beginning, but we've come a long way,
Mm-hmm.
and we've done a great job. I feel like on that front, we can always do a better job.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I joined as a third female partner. And so, even now surrounded by a lot of male partners, I mean, there is a good amount of female partners, but it's more of in terms of being a female executive and a female leader, right? And
Mm-hmm.
just making sure that you are afforded the same opportunities and rewarded the same way.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like there is an example of, another male partner who would basically be stomping their feet and saying, I deserve X, Y, and Z, give me more of this.
Mm-hmm.
That's never been my approach and not the way that I've been taught. And so when it came time for me to say, hey, like I deserve this as well, uh, I knew that was something I had to do,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it was done,
Mm-hmm.
but until I expressed myself, it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, all around, I think being more confident. So
Mm-hmm.
those are some of the differences, but thankfully, like True is a great culture where you don't have a lot of that. But those are the things that still, exist in our industry or
Mm-hmm.
in the workforce in general.
Yeah. So coming to an end and talking about like advice and inspiration, what is one piece of advice that you would give to young high school students wanting to enter up business roles?
I would say always have an open mind to speak with anyone,
Mm-hmm.
to essentially don't be afraid of networking because you never know what one conversation will lead to,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I always tell, I mean, this is different because this is more my team. I see the junior team trying to move up to principal and partner, and I say, get out there, talk to people, network. You never know where a business lead will come your way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have that conversation, you don't know. Like Ben, you might think like, gosh, I was on this path and I was thinking that this would be what I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden you have a conversation with somebody who opens up your eyes. And that person might have a similar upbringing, might have similar traits as you, similar interests. And they somehow, their path was curvy, but it ended up here. And
Mm-hmm.
so you might say, oh my God, I want to be an executive recruiter or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case may be. Right. And
Yeah.
so I always say, have that conversation. That and the second thing is, well, there's two things in one. Obviously, I was always taught to always be, kind to others, but stay grounded and humble, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very important to move through life with humility, and it's not always easy
Mm-hmm.
because, you can achieve success very quickly, and before you know it, it can get to your head.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you have to find something that's going to keep you grounded, you
Mm-hmm.
know, um, whether it's, talking through things with your friends and parents, whether it's leaning on something spiritual. For me, it's God. For you, it's whomever your God. But finding ways to always stay grounded is a piece of advice that my parents always gave me. Like always be
Mm.
humble.
Yeah. And what advice do you wish you had known at the start of career that you know now?
There's no stupid question.
Mm.
There's no stupid question, especially as you're young and growing and learning.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't hold back.
Yeah.
So that's something that I would say is an important thing to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do you stay motivated and focused, especially during your work, like your work days? Like, how do you just keep on pushing and keep on being like tenacious, as you mentioned earlier?
I How do I stay motivated? Um, oh my gosh, Ben, I have to think about that. Hey, you know why? I don't know how. I just keep going.
Mm, yeah.
So it's almost like I have a very high tolerance for stress. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm just used to just moving forward,
Yeah.
continuously moving the ball forward. The
Mm-hmm.
other stuff I'll deal with, but I need to just get through it. And I get through it with prayer and faith and talking it through with my husband and other friends. But um I think when it all comes crashing is like physically my body tells me, when I
Mm.
start sick or whatnot, that I need to slow down. But I think no, I mean, obviously what keeps me motivated and focused is my family. My family is everything to me.
Mm-hmm.
Husband, the kids, my parents, and my brothers who all live close to me. Um, First and foremost. And I think I always want to make them proud
Mm-hmm.
as, as a mother, as a female leader at the firm, as a daughter, as a daughter-in-law. It's a lot of pressure, but I think, those are the things that keep me motivated. And I think I'm just very grateful because when I think back, I always say to myself, like, who am I to have um sort of, you know, come up through the ranks and be in the role that I am in today?
Mm-hmm.
And I, my CEO always says, like, you need to also at times like pause and celebrate your wins, and kind of reflect the career that you've built.
Mm-hmm.
And so I probably have to do, more of that. But I'm just grateful to be here today.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time. Thanks
You're
for all
welcome.
the answers and
I
advice.
hope it was helpful.
It was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.